The air in the port of Limassol wasn't something you breathed so much as consumed. It was a thick, cloying cocktail you could practically chew on. A layered assault on the senses that settled heavy and wet in the lungs. A constant reminder of the oppressive, late-summer Cypriot humidity. The foundational note was the ancient, fecund brine of the Mediterranean. A smell of salt and life and decay that had clung to these shores for millennia. Layered over that was the sharp, acrid tang of diesel fumes from the dozen idling engines of trucks and generators. A smell of impatient power that stung the nostrils and coated the tongue. And beneath it all, a low, pervasive sweetness of organic rot from unseen corners, perhaps a forgotten crate of overripe figs or the refuse of the fishing boats. A constant reminder of entropy. The taste of it clung to the back of Eitan's throat. A flavor he had come to associate with a precipice of violence. The charged, humming quiet just before the world tore itself open. He sat motionless in the driver's seat of a battered Fiat Panda, a tourist's rental that screamed insignificance with every peeling flake of its once white paint. A network of hairline cracks, like a spider's web spun from glass, radiated from a stone chip on the windscreen, distorting the world outside into a fractured, unreliable mosaic. The air conditioning, a feature he'd paid a €30 premium for, whined with the asthmatic effort of a dying man, fighting a losing battle against the heat radiating from the tarmac. It did little more than stir the soupy air, leaving a perpetual film of sweat on his skin and making the cheap polyester of his polo shirt stick unpleasantly to his back and the hot vinyl of the seat. From his vantage point, tucked away in a dusty, forgotten corner of the long-term parking lot amongst derelict cars and sun-bleached tarpaulins, he had a clear, unobstructed line of sight to Berth 7. The MSC Irina was moored there, a colossal container ship the size of a fallen skyscraper. Its sheer steel cliffs groaning against mooring ropes as thick as a man's thigh as the tide gently nudged its immense bulk. Its hull was a patchwork map of rust and grime, a visual history charting 1,000 journeys across unforgiving seas. On its deck, a veritable city of multicolored steel boxes sat stacked in precarious towers against the bruised purple and soft orange of the twilight sky. One of them, just one anonymous unit in that sprawling, mobile metropolis of global commerce, was the reason he was here. TCKU 66734-2-4. He had memorized the number, chanting it to himself until it became a meaningless mantra, a key to a lock he prayed would turn. Eitan's knuckles were bone white on the cheap, textured plastic of the steering wheel. He was a ghost. A man whose real name was buried under so many layers of operational legends and meticulously forged passports that he sometimes had to pause to remember it himself. To the world, if it bothered to look, he was David Klein, a freelance software consultant from Tel Aviv enjoying a brief, solitary holiday. He had the right clothes, faded linen trousers, and the nondescript shirt. He had the right rental car. He had the right prop, a worn paperback copy of a popular Daniel Silva thriller, lying on the passenger seat, its spine broken, a bookmark halfway through. But the tension coiling in his gut was not that of a tourist anticipating a good meal. It was the cold, familiar dread of a Mossad Katsa, a field officer for the Institute for Intelligence and Special Operations. His eyes, dark and perpetually tired, framed by fine lines that spoke of too little sleep and too much seen, scanned the organized chaos of the port. Dockworkers in high-visibility vests moved like luminous ants, their movements dictated by the strident, rhythmic beeping of reversing trucks and the percussive, deafening clang of cranes lifting and lowering their 20-ton burdens. It was the symphony of global trade, a sound he had learned to dissect for anomalies, for the one note that was out of key. To them, container TCKU 667342-4 was just another box. To Eitan, and to the nation he served, it was a ticking bomb. Inside that 40-foot steel coffin, nestled in custom-molded, shock-absorbent foam, were 12 Quds, 4 advanced attack drones. They were not the crude, propeller-driven models Hezbollah had been using for years to harass Israel's northern border. Little more than glorified model airplanes carrying rudimentary explosives. These were the next generation, a generous and deadly gift from Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Their design was a testament to malevolent ingenuity. They featured stealth-coated composite fuselages, a matte black skin of radar-absorbent material that drank in radio waves rather than reflecting them. They carried sophisticated electronic warfare suites capable of spoofing GPS signals, turning defensive interceptors into blind wanderers chasing phantom targets. Most terrifyingly, they were armed with a new type of tandem-charge warhead, an explosive lance designed with a single purpose: to defeat the trophy active protection systems on Israel's Merkava tanks. The warhead worked in 2 stages. A small initial charge would detonate just before impact, designed to trigger and neutralize the tank's defensive countermeasures, followed a millisecond later by a superheated jet of molten copper that would punch through the now vulnerable armor. They were small enough to be launched from the reinforced bed of a pickup truck, fast enough to challenge the reaction time of the formidable Iron Dome, and lethal enough to turn a bustling Tel Aviv cafe or a sprawling Haifa chemical plant into a charnel house in the space of a heartbeat. The intelligence had come from a source buried deep inside the command structure of the IRGC's Al-Quds force, a high-level asset codenamed Cassandra. The initial intercept was a whisper, a tiny burst of encrypted data piggybacking on a seemingly innocuous international financial transaction, a digital ghost hiding in the noise of global finance. It had taken Unit 8200, Israel's formidable signals intelligence agency, 3 sleepless, caffeine-fueled days to peel back the nested layers of military-grade encryption. The analysts, young men and women with old eyes, had worked in a windowless, temperature-controlled room, fueled by energy drinks and a burning sense of urgency, sifting through trillions of bits of data until a single fragile thread emerged. The message, when it was finally reconstituted from the digital ether, was brief and terrifying. The shipment of Falcons departs Bandar Abbas on the 14th. Destination, Beirut. Transshipment via Limassol. They will fly soon. Falcons. A poetic but chilling euphemism. Eitan had spent hours in a darkened briefing room in Tel Aviv, watching the test footage Cassandra had managed to exfiltrate at immense personal risk. The footage was grainy, shot on a mobile phone, the sound distorted by desert wind. A drone, a mere speck against a washed-out sky, streaked towards a decommissioned T-72 tank. The explosion wasn't large or spectacular, but it was focused, efficient. There was a brief flash, and then the camera zoomed in on the result. A small, perfectly round hole in the turret, glowing cherry red at the edges, from which a thin wisp of black smoke curled. A weapon like that, in the hands of Hezbollah's elite Radwan force, didn't just tip the scales. It threw the entire strategic calculus of the northern front into a fire. A subtle, insistent vibration against his hip. Eitan glanced down at the burner phone, a cheap, anonymous device he would crush under his heel and discard within the hour. The screen glowed with a single, pre-arranged message, sent from a number that had already ceased to exist. The fisherman is casting his net. It was the signal. The container had been offloaded. It was now sitting in the bonded stacking area, a temporary purgatory of steel and bureaucracy, awaiting transfer to a smaller vessel destined for Beirut. The clock had started. Their window was precisely 4 hours. A carefully calculated slice of time between the shift change of the port police and the arrival of the morning crew. 4 hours to commit a perfect crime in the middle of a sovereign nation's busiest port. To swap 12 of the world's most advanced attack drones with 12 perfect insidious replicas. Eitan turned the key. The Fiat's wheezing engine coughed to life with a shudder. The mission, codenamed Operation Trojan Falcon, was live. He pulled out of the parking lot, the car's weak halogen headlights cutting a pathetic swath through the deepening gloom, and melted into the sparse evening traffic. He wasn't a commando, not a trigger puller. The concealed Glock 19 Gen 4 holstered in the small of his back, its polymer frame a familiar, comforting weight against his skin, was a tool of last resort. His real weapon was his mind. He was a conductor, and his orchestra was an unseen force of specialists, technicians, and ghosts, all moving towards a single point on the map. His job was to ensure every instrument played its part in perfect, silent harmony. Failure wasn't just an option. It was an existential threat. 20 minutes later, navigating the narrow, labyrinthine streets of Limassol's old town, he parked in a private residential garage and entered a nondescript apartment in a low-rise building overlooking the bay. The air inside was cool and smelled of ozone from the humming electronics, mingling with the bitter aroma of stale coffee and the faint, sharp scent of Rivka's Gauloise's cigarettes. Rivka, his handler and the deputy head of the Caesarea department, didn't look up from the bank of monitors that had turned a cheap dining table into a high-tech command center. She was a woman in her late 50s, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun that allowed no stray strands. Her eyes, the color of a winter sea, had seen too much to be surprised by anything. She wore a simple, sleeveless black dress and could have passed for a local school teacher. But her presence filled the room with an authority that was absolute and unquestionable. A freshly stubbed-out cigarette smoldered in a heavy glass ashtray, its thin trail of smoke curling towards the overworked air conditioner. "Status," she said, her voice a low rasp, gravelly from a lifetime of unfiltered cigarettes and sleepless nights. "I'm in. The package is on the ground at grid 34 Delta," Eitan reported, his own voice sounding hollow in the quiet room. "Security profile is as we predicted. 2 roving patrols, standard patterns. CCTV coverage is gapped at the northeast corner for 90 seconds every 12 minutes. Andreas is in position." Rivka nodded, her gaze fixed on a screen displaying a satellite thermal image of the port. The container glowed with a faint, residual warmth from the day's sun, a pale orange rectangle utterly indistinguishable from the hundreds of identical boxes surrounding it. The team? 5 minutes out. They're coming in with the fishing trawler, the Nereus. And Gadget? Eitan glanced at a younger man, hunched over a laptop in the corner, a pair of oversized headphones clamped over his ears, isolating him in his own world of code and data streams. Shai, known operationally as Gadget, was a prodigy seconded from Unit 8200. He looked barely out of his teens, with a nervous energy that manifested in a constantly jiggling knee. But his fingers danced across his keyboard with the fluid grace of a concert pianist. He was their electronic key, the ghost in the machine who would blind the port's digital eyes and deafen its ears. "The port's network architecture is a joke," Gadget muttered, not to them but to himself, a running commentary on his work. Legacy systems patched with cheap, off-the-shelf security software from a company in Bulgaria. It's like they're leaving the door unlocked and putting up a "Please Rob Us" sign. He pushed his glasses up his nose, leaving a slight smudge on the lens. "I'm in their primary server. I can loop the CCTV feeds now, but I'll wait for your signal. The longer I'm in, the greater the chance some competent, underpaid night shift admin spots the intrusion. Rivka turned her chair slowly to face Eitan. The squeak of the cheap casters was loud in the tense silence. "The decoys have been checked?" "Triple checked," Eitan confirmed. "They're on the Nereus. Weight is matched to within 100 grams. The composite material has the same thermal and radar signature as the original Quds 4. From the outside, they are identical down to the machine markings on the fuselage and the faint scent of packing grease. But on the inside, they were a work of insidious art. Each decoy drone was a hollow shell, its deadly warhead and guidance system replaced by a sophisticated piece of Israeli technology. At its heart was a miniaturized, hardened transponder, a marvel from the labs at Rafael Advanced Defense Systems. It drew power not from a conventional battery that could be detected by electronic sweeps, but from a state-of-the-art thermoelectric generator that converted ambient heat, the minute temperature difference between the inside and outside of the drone's casing, into a tiny, continuous electrical current. It was designed to remain dormant, undetectable, a sleeper agent in electronic form, until it received a specific, encrypted satellite signal on a narrowband frequency. Once activated, it would broadcast its precise GPS coordinates, updating every 2 seconds. But that wasn't all. Each unit also contained a microscopic microphone and a MEM, micro-electromechanical systems, sensor package that could detect changes in barometric pressure, humidity, and movement. They weren't just trackers. They were mobile listening posts. They would lead Mossad not just to a storage warehouse, but to the very heart of Hezbollah's drone program. The command and control bunkers, the launch sites, and most importantly, the men who ran it. The plan was audacious in its simplicity and terrifying in its complexity. The Nereus, a decrepit-looking fishing boat that smelled authentically of fish and diesel, would moor at an unmonitored section of the pier, ostensibly for emergency engine repairs. The team, 3 elite operators from the Kidon, Mossad's Assassination and Special Operations Unit, would slip over the side, clad in black, carrying their specialized tools. They would rendezvous with Andreas, their Scionum, their local helper. Andreas was a 50-year-old dock crane operator whose father had been saved by an Israeli surgeon in a Jerusalem hospital decades ago. A debt of life he was now repaying at profound risk to his own. He would be their guide through the labyrinth of containers. "Team is on the move," Rivka said, her eyes on a different screen, this one showing a grainy, low-light feed from a micro-drone hovering silently hundreds of feet above the port. 3 wraith-like figures detached from the shadow of the trawler and melted into the industrial landscape with an unnatural fluidity. "Gadget now," Eitan ordered, his voice sharp. "Looping feeds," the young technician replied. On his screen, the live footage from a dozen cameras in Sector 4 froze for a single, terrifying frame, then resumed, now playing a continuous 90-second recording of an empty, quiet dockside. To any guard watching, it would look perfectly normal. Electronic silence is a go. Their motion sensors in that sector are reporting a family of stray cats. I've injected just enough false data to make them seem plausible. They won't trigger a primary alarm unless something the size of a truck moves through. Eitan leaned closer to the main monitor, his heart hammering against his ribs in a slow, heavy rhythm. He could see the 3 Kidon operators moving with a fluid, predatory grace that betrayed their lethal purpose. They were led by Ilan, a man Eitan had worked with on a disastrous operation in Vienna 2 years prior. They had both survived, which forged a bond stronger than friendship. Ilan was calm, methodical, and utterly lethal. They reached the designated stack, and Andreas, the crane operator, stepped out from behind a forklift, a small, nervous man in a grease-stained jumpsuit, his face pale and slick with sweat in the gloom. He pointed upwards. TCKU 667342-4 was on the third level, boxed in on all sides. This was the first major hurdle. Andreas couldn't use his massive dock crane. The noise would be deafening, and the activity would be logged on a central server Gadget couldn't risk tampering with. Instead, the team had brought their own solution. One of the operators unslung a compact, carbon fiber winch system with powerful magnetic clamps. He scaled the sheer corrugated steel side of the container stack with the ease of a rock climber, his movements economical and silent. He attached the clamps to the container sitting directly above their target. The other two attached harnesses to the 20-ton blocking container itself. It was a slow, agonizingly quiet process. The winch, powered by a near-silent electric motor, began to lift. The box rose inch by agonizing inch, the only sound a faint, high-pitched hum that was lost in the ambient industrial noise of the port. Time. Eitan breathed. The word a cloud of vapor in the chilled air of the apartment. 78 minutes since you gave the go-ahead. Rivka answered, her voice flat, a human chronometer. They're 12 minutes behind schedule. The minutes stretched into an eternity, each second dripping away like water torture. They watched on the drone feed as the team cleared the path, finally gaining access to the target container. The official customs seal was a high-security bolt seal, impossible to bypass without leaving obvious evidence. So they wouldn't bypass it. Ilan produced a device that looked like a futuristic power tool, a portable plasma cutter. But instead of a bright, noisy arc of light, it emitted a low, almost subsonic thrum. It was designed to cut through the corrugated steel of the container door from the hinge side. A precise, surgical incision that could be resealed later, leaving the official seal untouched. Eitan could almost smell the sharp scent of ozone from his vantage point miles away. He could visualize the thin, cherry-red line of molten metal appearing on the steel door. It was a painstaking, delicate process. One mistake, one slip of the hand, and the entire operation would be compromised. The door was finally cut free from its internal hinges. Two of the operators eased it open just enough for a man to slip through, the groan of stressed metal barely a whisper. "They're in," Rivka murmured. The feed from the micro-drone showed two figures disappearing into the absolute blackness of the container, while Elon stood guard outside, a motionless silhouette. Inside, it would be pitch black, hot and stuffy. They would be using panoramic night vision, the world rendered in eerie, ghostly shades of green. Eitan had seen the manifest. The drones were disassembled, packed in 6 large, foam-lined wooden crates. Each crate had to be opened, the real drone components removed, and the decoy components placed inside, perfectly replicating the original packing configuration. The real drones, the prize, would be loaded into specially designed, shielded bags to mask any electronic or radiological signature, and then extracted. Another vibration. Eitan's burner phone again. This one was from Ilan's team leader on the ground. A direct, encrypted image burst. A single photo appeared on the screen. It was a close-up of one of the drone fuselages. Underneath the manufacturer's plate was a tiny, almost invisible marking, laser-etched into the composite material. A stylized scorpion. It was the insignia of the IRGC's Unit 340, their clandestine research and development division. It was confirmation. These were the real deal. They've confirmed the payload, Eitan told Rivka, his voice tight with a mixture of dread and elation. Beginning the swap. The process was a reverse assembly line conducted in the dark. Crates were opened with pneumatic pry bars that made only a soft, satisfying hiss. The sleek, dark gray components of the Quds 4 were lifted out with reverent care. Eitan knew every inch of them from the intelligence reports. The swept-wing fuselage, the rear-mounted pusher propeller, the gimbal-mounted sensor turret under the nose. They were beautiful, elegant killing machines. As each real component came out, a perfectly weighted and shaped decoy went in. The team worked in complete silence, communicating with the precise, economical hand signals of men who had done this 100 times before. Outside, a light flickered in the distance. A security patrol jeep. Elon, patrol incoming. East quadrant. ETA 3 minutes. Eitan spoke into a tiny microphone taped to his collar. His voice was transmitted via a tight beam, frequency-hopping radio on the 462.5625 MHz band, an ultra-high frequency channel that was all but undetectable and indistinguishable from background radio noise. "Copy," came the clipped, calm reply in his earpiece. "We see them." On the monitor, Elon pressed himself flat against the side of the container stack, becoming one with the deep shadows. The jeep trundled past, its headlights cutting lazy yellow arcs through the darkness. The guards inside were drinking coffee, their conversation a faint, tinny sound picked up by the micro-drone's sensitive microphone. They didn't even glance in the direction of the stack. They drove on, disappearing behind a mountain of refrigerated units. The collective exhalation in the apartment was audible. "Their burning time?" Rivka stated, a cold, simple observation. "The window is closing." The swap continued. It was a race against the dawn, against the shift change, against the cruel specter of random chance. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime compressed into 2 hours, Elon's voice crackled in Eitan's ear. "The falcons are caged. The Trojan horses are in the stable. We are sealing the box." The team worked with a furious, renewed precision. The container door was swung back into place. Another specialized tool, a portable high-frequency induction welder, was used to reseal the cut they had made. It fused the metal back together from the inside out, leaving a clean, almost invisible seam. The final touch was a small aerosol can. One of the operators sprayed a fine mist over the new weld. It was a chemical agent that instantly oxidized the metal, creating a patina of rust and grime that perfectly matched the rest of the aging container. Even under close, expert inspection, the door would look untouched. The blocking container was lowered back into place with the same painstaking silence. The winch system was packed away. The team gathered the shielded bags containing the real drones and began to exfiltrate, moving like ghosts back towards the Nereus. Andreas gave them a final, terrified nod from the shadows and vanished back into the warren of the port. His part was done. He would now go home, kiss his children, and try to forget the night he helped steal a ghost from a steel box. As the first hint of gray lightened the eastern sky, staining the clouds a soft rose, the Nereus pulled away from the pier, its engine chugging nonchalantly. To any observer, it was just another fishing boat heading out for the day's catch. But in its insulated fish hold, it carried a treasure trove of enemy technology that would be dissected, analyzed, and reverse-engineered by Israel's top defense scientists. In the apartment, Gadget was wiping his systems, erasing every digital footprint, every ghost of a packet he had sent or received. "We're clean," he announced, pulling off his headphones and rubbing his red-rimmed eyes. As far as their network is concerned, the last 4 hours never happened. Eitan watched the container on the satellite feed. TCKU 667342-4 sat there, inert, waiting, a silent promise of violence now transformed into an instrument of deception. The most dangerous part of the mission was over. But the most important part was just beginning. The decoys were in place. The trap was set. Now, all they had to do was wait for the enemy to walk into it. The wait was a unique form of torture. For 2 days, Eitan, Rivka, and Gadget remained in the Limassol safe house, a self-imposed prison of stale air and rising tension. They slept in shifts on uncomfortable couches, subsisting on stale bread, olives, and brutally strong coffee brewed in a cheap percolator that filled the apartment with a perpetually scorched aroma. The container was loaded onto a smaller, rust-bucket freighter, the Lyall, bound for Beirut. Eitan watched its slow, inexorable progress across the Mediterranean on the global shipping tracker. Every nautical mile brought a fresh wave of anxiety. What if they had been spotted? What if a routine customs check in Beirut, famously corrupt but occasionally thorough, decided to do a deep, physical inspection? What if one of the decoys had a technical failure? The Lyall docked in Beirut under the cover of darkness. The offloading was quick, efficient, and overseen by men in civilian clothes, whose military bearing was unmistakable even on a grainy satellite feed. The container was loaded onto a flatbed truck. Eitan felt his pulse quicken, a dry, papery feeling in his mouth. This was it. "Activate the first transponder," Rivka ordered, her voice cutting through the tension. From a command center buried deep beneath the Kiryat military headquarters in Tel Aviv, an analyst sent the coded burst transmission. In Limassol, Eitan watched his screen. A new icon blinked into existence. A single red dot, overlaid on a map of southern Beirut. It was moving. "We have a signal," Eitan said, his voice tight. "It's live." The truck bypassed the usual commercial depots. It rumbled through the southern suburbs of Dahiyeh, Hezbollah's stronghold, a city within a city where the writ of the Lebanese state did not run. It traveled east towards the Bekaa Valley, the long, fertile strip of land that ran along the border with Syria. This was Hezbollah's heartland, a landscape dotted with villages, farms, and hidden beneath them, a massive clandestine network of bunkers, tunnels, and weapons depots. The truck finally came to a stop at a large, innocuous-looking farm complex, surrounded by sprawling olive groves and vineyards. From the outside, it looked peaceful, rustic, but satellite imagery had long flagged it as a suspected Hezbollah logistics hub. The red dot on Eitan's screen went stationary, placing it squarely inside the largest of the barns. "They've taken the bait," Rivka said, a rare flicker of triumph in her tired eyes. "Now we see where they take the pieces." Over the next 48 hours, they activated the decoys one by one, only after the sensor packages indicated a crate had been moved and opened. Each time, a new red dot appeared on the map. The operations intelligence picture began to bloom with horrifying clarity. 2 drones were taken to a nondescript building in the heart of a crowded village, likely an engineering and assembly workshop, cynically placed to use civilians as human shields. 3 more were transported deep into the hills, their signals suddenly vanishing as they were taken underground. The MEMS sensors reported a sharp drop in barometric pressure, which the analysts in Tel Aviv calculated as a descent of at least 50 meters. This was a command bunker, deep and hardened. The remaining 7 drones, including the one whose microphone they had remotely activated, stayed in the main barn. Through that tiny, powerful microphone, the analysts in Tel Aviv could hear snatches of conversation in Arabic and Farsi. They heard the metallic clink of tools, the electronic whir of diagnostic equipment being tested. They heard a name spoken with reverence. Al-Mughnieh. It was the name of a senior Hezbollah engineer, a man known for his brilliance and his ruthlessness, a key figure in their drone program and a high-value target for years. "He's there," Eitan said, staring at the sound wave analysis on the screen. Al-Mughnieh is personally inspecting the shipment. The pieces were all in place. They now had the precise, real-time locations of a primary assembly workshop, a deep command bunker, and a logistics hub where the enemy's top drone expert was currently working. The intelligence was a windfall beyond their wildest expectations. The call came from Tel Aviv. It was the head of Mossad himself, a man known only as D. His voice, transmitted over a heavily encrypted line, was calm, but carried the undeniable weight of the decision he was about to authorize. "The Prime Minister has been briefed. The Air Force is on standby. We have a window to strike all 3 targets simultaneously. Caesarea's recommendation?" Rivka looked at Eitan. It was his operation, his intelligence, his call to make. Eitan thought of the grainy footage of the Quds 4 hitting the tank. He thought of the cafes in Tel Aviv, the schools in the north, the faces of the people he was sworn to protect. The risk of waiting was too great. What if they discovered the decoys? The opportunity would be lost forever, and the asset, Cassandra, would be compromised. "We strike," Eitan said, his voice firm, leaving no room for doubt. "We have actionable, real-time intelligence on high-value targets. We end this now." "Agreed," Rivka said, nodding to D over the secure line. "The recommendation is to execute." "Very well," came the reply. "May God be with you." The line went dead. The world seemed to shrink to the confines of the small, stuffy apartment. The final phase was out of their hands now. It belonged to the pilots and the planners in the Kyria. Gadget patched into the IAF's tactical feed. A new set of icons appeared on their main screen. 2 F-35 Adair stealth fighters, designated Wraith 1 and Wraith 2, lifting off from Nevatim Air Base in the Negev Desert. They climbed steeply, turning north, their forms all but invisible to enemy radar, digital ghosts moving towards a deadly purpose. The tension in the room was a physical thing, thick and suffocating. No one spoke. The only sounds were the low hum of the electronics and the distant murmur of the sleeping city. Eitan watched the icons of the fighters cross into Lebanese airspace, completely undetected. He watched the 3 red dots of the Hezbollah targets pulsing on the map like malignant hearts. The microphone feed from the barn suddenly crackled with excited voices. The analysts in Tel Aviv translated in real time, their voices a clipped, professional monotone in Eitan's earpiece. "They are preparing a test flight. Al-Mughnieh is giving instructions for pre-flight checks. They've selected a unit for launch. They believe it's ready." A cold dread washed over Eitan, colder than the air conditioning. A test flight. If they attempted to launch a decoy, its flight path would be wrong. It wouldn't respond to their controls. The ruse would be exposed instantly. They might have only seconds before Al-Mughnieh realized what was happening and fled into a tunnel, lost to them forever. "Wraith 1 to control." A pilot's voice, impossibly calm and filtered through layers of technology, came over the feed. "We are in position, awaiting final authorization." "Strike! Strike now!" Eitan hissed. A desperate whisper, as if the pilot thousands of feet above Lebanon could hear him. "Control to all units," came the voice from the Kyria command center, sharp and decisive. "Weapons free. Execute Trojan Falcon." "Wraith 1 engaging primary target," the pilot reported. On the screen, A new symbol detached from the fighter icon. A GPS-guided bomb, hurtling towards the Earth at supersonic speed. Eitan held his breath, his lungs burning. The microphone from the barn was still live. He could hear the distinct,